Welcome everyone, Kyle Martin hosting Discover Marshalltown, and I am proud to host this program once again. And we have another guest here in studio today, and it's Carolyn Briggs. And Carolyn's professor of English, and I'm assuming that you have other titles as well, or is that, I know you do some creative writing as well here.
Right. I teach creative writing.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, let's find out a little bit, because before we get to the real reason why you're here, and she's wondering why she's here,
right.
Before we get to that, we don't ambush her like a 60 Minutes type program. I promise not to make you cry. But we want to find out a little biographical information about you.
Okay.
So why don't we find out like where you're from, because you're not originally from this area, and how long you've been here, and maybe a little bit about your family and such.
Okay. Well, here's the first surprise. I am from this area.
Oh, you are?
I was born in Eldora.
Okay.
Right. So I moved to Arkansas and raised my family in Arkansas as a young woman and lived there probably 18 years. And went to the University of Arkansas and received a Master's of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. That's why I teach creative writing. It's my thing. And after I graduated, I was going to do Teach for America, which is a program some people might be familiar with, in which college graduates go to under-resourced schools all over the country and teach as apprentice teachers, even though they have their own classrooms, for a couple years. And I was assigned Tunica, Mississippi. And so I was going to take my 15-year-old daughter with me, and it just wasn't a good fit. So I was at loose ends. I didn't know what to do. My mother in Iowa said, come home. So I came back and eventually got this job here.
So there you go. Well, welcome back.
Thank you.
How long have you been teaching here?
This is my 12th year.
Okay.
I've been here a while.
Well, excellent. Let's talk a little bit about why you decided to become a writer. Was that something that you aspired to as a young lady? I mean, did you have the typewriter in your bedroom way before computers and type out short stories and such?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had a big Chief tablet that I would go to the Ben Franklin store in downtown Eldora and buy and fill with my stories and my poems from the time I was in probably second grade, probably just about the time we learned to write.
Yeah.
I wrote a story with my spelling words, and one of the bullies in the class said, "You did not write that," and he was threatening me on the playground. But I knew that was a compliment, because even though I was scared, I must be pretty good.
You must be pretty good.
So that started it.
So when you were in Arkansas and you got your formal education and you got your master's, and you decided that you wanted to not only teach, but you wanted to write. How did that progress? I mean, because there's always that, how do I do it? How do I get from, I've got the education now, what do I do with that education?
Okay. Well, I spent 4 years with writers from all over the country in that program, and many of them are teaching at universities now, and we all wanted to write the great American novel. We wanted success, and it was very, very difficult to break through. However, I wrote a story called Rogue and sent that to a journal, a literary journal called New Letters. It's out of University of Missouri in Kansas City. And it won the regional prize for an emerging writer. So that was a pretty cool thing. And just as that was sinking in, the $1,000 prize and getting the story published, I got a call from an agent on the East Coast and said, I saw your prize, I saw your story, I'd like to represent you. So that was the breakthrough, having an agent want to represent me and work with me.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about Rogue.
Rogue. People in Iowa will appreciate Rogue. It's a story based on a teenager detasseling. And actually in bean fields for a part of the story, getting out the corn plants that were rogues. But she is a rogue, and so there you go.
Well, you have won other awards. Tell us about Higher Ground.
Okay.
Because this is really the one, I guess maybe what you're best known for.
Right. Higher Ground was a result of, I have to back up. Higher Ground is the screen adaptation of my memoir, This Dark World.
Okay.
And I wrote This Dark World, and it was published in 2002. And a screenwriter in LA He said he lived under the shadow of the Hollywood sign. Said, I've read your book. I won't rest until it becomes a movie.
Wow.
And so he asked me if he could have the rights to it, and so he negotiated for those. I mean, I think he got it for a couple $100. It was not much. Writers are not rich. And so he got that, but we became friends, and for several years he would ask me about my life. We wrote letters. Sometimes Tim and I, this original screenwriter, would email back and forth 3 or 4 times a day. And he was very convinced that he could write a screenplay adapting that book. However, the screenplay he wrote wasn't strong. It wasn't strong. He didn't know the world of religious fundamentalism, which is what This Dark World is about. So he asked me if I'd help. So we wrote a draft, and with that draft, Vera Farmiga said, I want to do this. So she came on board. Icky stuff. Then Tim left. Then Vera said, will you just do it? So Vera Farmiga asked me if I would write the screenplay for this movie, starting all over from scratch. And so she flew to Iowa, she and her baby and her husband. I picked them up in Des Moines Airport. I was like, wow, am I really doing this pinch myself because this actress is going to get off the plane I'm waiting for. Stayed with me and my husband for several days, and we began the work of writing Higher Ground. So she and her husband shepherded me through writing a screenplay, and that's what happened.
Wow. Okay, let's talk about what your original story was about. It's your memoir, so it's about you. Let's talk about that, and then we'll talk about maybe some differences between that and the film.
Okay, sure. My memoir was a story of spending 20 years, some in Iowa, most in Arkansas, in a religious community. Very not associated with a particular denomination, but very New Testament kind of church with elders and a patriarchy and children raised. And I mean, I studied a book called You Can Be the Wife of a Happy Husband. So it was that kind of community where the patriarch and men were all, and women were subservient to that. And I spent most of my youth in that, raised my children in that. And then I went to college and some things changed.
Yeah. The differences between your memoir, the book, and then the screenplay, there's always differences.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when you read, the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and then you see the film, there's, subtle
Right.
differences. Maybe Harper Lee envisioned that. Who knows? Maybe she worked with the screenwriters. Who knows? But let's talk about how it's different than your memoir.
It's different. It's a different animal. We named the protagonist a different name. We didn't end with her getting to go to college or anything. We have her kind of intellectually opening up a little bit, but it's zeroing in on a few years rather than 15 years.
Sure.
And so we also put some things into the screenplay that I kept out of my memoir. So there are actual true things that are in the movie that I didn't put in the book. So that was kind of interesting just because time had passed. And also I would say probably the big difference is that the movie is called Higher Ground and the book is called This Dark World. So I think that reveals, and I titled both of them, so I think it shows some evolution of change where I was able to, with more years passing, to view those years in a more positive way.
Sure. Well, and you said positive. I didn't get a chance to read the story, but from what I understand, it was a very turbulent time in your life.
Right. Turbulent, as all people in their 20s and 30s may be, but also positive in that a lot of people assume I regret those years, but I don't, because I think it was a safe period for my children. I think my children grew up very loved and protected, and that's my perspective. My children, who are all very successful, they have graduate degrees. My daughter's a professor at a university. They don't like their upbringing. They don't appreciate the way they were raised. They think it was too narrow and too restricted, but I think that provided them some shelter they might not have had otherwise.
Sure. Let's talk a little bit about the writing process itself. I've interviewed authors before on the radio. Dean Koontz would be one of them.
Okay.
I've interviewed Dean Koontz a couple of times, and I usually average an author a month that I interview on the radio. And it's one of my favorite questions to ask them is, like, where's their place that they go to write?
Mm-hmm.
Do they have a shack behind their main residence that they go to? Do they have a room? Do they leave the state? Where do you go to write?
I always have an office wherever we're at, and my office has to have a window with a tree. So I need a tree and I need some sky.
There you go.
That's what I need.
And so, like, we joked a little bit that you started, writing on the big chief tablets and the tablets, and then I'm assuming you eventually progressed to a typewriter. Do you write now on a computer, your word processor? It's so much easier, isn't it?
It is, and you have all your drafts, and yeah, it's awesome.
It's awesome. So what are you working on now? Is there anything in particular? I mean, I don't want to skip over all the other works that you've done, but we can circle back to that. What are you working on right now?
I'm working on a novel right now, and the novel is a work. I only have summers. This community college gig, very intense. Very intense because I'm working around the clock with, especially being an English teacher, prepping and grading. So my summers are my only time to write. And my summers, I usually travel someplace pretty interesting for a while. So I have to make decisions like, what do I want to produce, or do I just want to get on my bike in Denmark like I did last summer and ride for a while? But I am working on a novel, and it is important to me. I find what I can produce regularly are essays, and those are what I have been fortunate enough to been regularly publishing in the past several years.
Okay. And I know that you've had some works that have been submitted to some major publications, some major newspapers and magazines. You want to talk about some of those, please?
Well, for a while I was writing series for Religious Dispatches, which is a nice online magazine, and Salon magazine. New York Times published an essay of mine in their Modern Love column a few years back. I published a piece in a book called, what's the book called? It was Women Leaving Extreme Faith. And I published an essay in that book. There's another one that I would like to mention that I'm
That's okay.
escaping.
Are a lot of your stories and essays based on religion then?
No. That one in the New York Times was based on a Christmas where everybody in my family was smoking pot.
Okay.
So that one was not.
Not so religious. No. The mistletoe looked a lot different that Christmas. That's okay. That's okay. And you've won some awards.
Right.
Okay, well, you want to talk about those? Because some of them are like is it the Roger Ebert Award? Is that the Thumbs Up?
Yeah, that was the Thumbs Up Award. That was very exciting. And Roger Ebert has an annual film festival in Champaign, Illinois, and he named Higher Ground, the movie, as one of his 12 favorite films of the year, and ones that he didn't think got enough critical acclaim, although Higher Ground did quite well, actually, with the critics. New York Times reviewed it, everybody, and gave it thumbs up. But Roger Ebert, he loved the film, and he invited me to come to his festival, and he gave me this award, the Golden Statue, the Thumbs Up, and I met him.
Neat.
And I said, and he couldn't speak, right?
Right. He had a tracheotomy. He had cancer, right?
Right. And so he had a little tablet like yours, and he would write notes. And I said, Mr. Ebert, thank you so much for liking my film. And he wrote on his little tablet, "What's not to like?"
Aww.
And I said, could I have that?
Oh, how sweet.
That you just wrote. He signed it, Roger, and handed it to me.
Well, we need to take a break. We are here, Discover Marshalltown, and we have Carolyn Briggs, author and also professor here at MCC. We will be right back right after this.
When I was a young girl, my dream was to be a softball player. I had a wicked fastball that shattered the other teams. But when they cut the funding for physical education, I didn't get the chance to play, and my dream struck out. I still get to throw heat for a living, but it's just a little different now.
Welcome back to Discover Marshalltown. I'm Kyle Martin, hosting the program again today. Carolyn Briggs is a local author and a well-respected national author as well, and also teaches creative writing with MCC. And why don't we talk a little bit about your teaching? You said it occupies, I would say, a lion's share of your time. How long have you been doing? Have you been doing that pretty much your whole adult career?
Right. I've either been in school, and when I started college in my 30s, that was 4 years undergrad, 4 years graduate school, then went right into teaching adjunct, and then I got the job here for 12 years. So
wow.
The last 20 years, it's safe to say I've been in a classroom in some capacity.
Well, you're one of the few teachers that can actually say you've done it. You're walking the walk. You're teaching it, but you're doing it as well, and you're actively still doing what you went to school and what you're still teaching. Let's talk a little bit about the students, because I love to write. I also took a lot of creative writing classes in school. I thought I would also write the great American novel. That has yet to happen. I can't find the time to write hardly at all anymore. But the students themselves, do they have that pie in the sky? I'm going to do it. I'm going to be the next Stephen King. I'm going to be the next W.P. Kinsella. You know, just a stroke of luck, and they're going to get lightning in a bottle.
Well. I wish I had more students like that, to tell you the truth.
Really?
I wish I had a student with a big dream. Sometimes I don't think my students here have a big enough vision of what might happen with them.
Okay.
We have such an interesting student body. I mean, we have students from all over the world, and they're fascinating to me. The diversity on this campus is the best part of my job. I never dreamed that working at a college surrounded by cornfields, I'm going to meet kids from all over the world. One of my favorite students was from Iceland, and my daughter and I went and spent a couple of weeks with him and his family in Iceland a couple of weeks ago. So that was pretty awesome. And some of them are excellent writers, and they love the written word. But when I ask my students, what have you read? What do you read? I'm finding that what's happening more and more is students aren't reading. And if students aren't reading, that certainly isn't enlarging their capacity for what can I do to create, you know. So my creative writers, they are reading a little bit, and I don't know if they were willing to do the work, because to be a successful writer, you have to have talent. You can't give anybody talent. It's got to be inside of them. They have to have a work ethic where they're going to work really hard, and then they have to have a little bit of luck. So that's the magic formula, you know, to have the talent, be willing to work, and then get the luck. And a lot of us don't get the luck. I was lucky enough to get a break, but a lot of people don't.
And an agent helps.
An agent definitely is lucky.
Kids, get an agent, a literary agent.
What's the matter with you? Get an agent.
Exactly. This is awesome. Get it. Can't you see?
Right.
You need to get an agent. What about self-publishing, Carolyn? Because that is a new avenue for an awful lot of writers right now. They can write blogs, and they can self-publish, and you don't have to send it to a major, you don't have to send it to HarperCollins or a major publishing firm.
Right. There's no guardian at the gate anymore. There's nobody saying that's not good enough, that's not for us, that's not going to make money. If you really have this desire to publish, you can. As you said, you can self-publish, and our kids need to be doing that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
amazing. And you know, you can write something that you may think is horrible, and the wonderful thing about computers now is you can save it and you can go back and you can edit it and make it better and add to it and take stuff out, you know. I mean, it's so much different than when I was a kid. When you type something out, you know, you'd have to get the white out and you'd be like, that doesn't even that's not even a word, you know. Now you can totally change everything and go back and redo it. But you know, something that I meant to ask you at the beginning of our interview, Carolyn, is that writing a screenplay, that has got to be a completely different animal than what you do, because you're literally writing the words that these particular actors are going to say.
Right.
And that's a little different, well, it's more than a little different than a narrative of a story.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. It was such a revelation to me that writing a screenplay for me was a collaborative effort, because I had other people who were like Vera and her husband who were involved in the film industry, and they could teach me how it's like pictures. It's like a puzzle, right? You have to have this picture in the audience's mind while this is happening. There's no exposition. There's nothing inside of the character. That's all got to be conveyed through this series of images and
Right.
words. And so that was such an education for me and a pleasure. I enjoyed it, but wow, so different.
Well, you have to tell the story in a lot fewer words
Right.
a lot of times.
Right.
And there's really not, with a screenplay, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's not usually as big a backstory.
No.
You can't develop the depth
No.
of the characters.
You can do some flashbacks and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're jumping in media res in the middle of things.
That's crazy.
Right?
That's just got to be a completely different, and obviously you were able to make that leap.
It worked. I mean, yeah, I was very happy. Very
Well,
happy.
that's awesome. Let's talk a little bit about your background a little bit more, because I think we kind of touched on this, and it was your memoir, obviously the inspiration for your memoir, but your upbringing in the church. I don't want this to be a controversial show in any way, shape, or form, but it obviously changed you so much that you decided, that's not something I want to do any longer. Was it just a bad, and your parents weren't necessarily involved,
No,
from what
no.
I've read before.
Right.
They just kind of dropped you off at church?
Well, and I don't consider those years that I was in the church. I was one of those kids that gets dropped off.
Yeah.
But after I married at a very young age, my young husband, and I, teenage parents, we were the ones on our own that kind of navigated ourselves into this community of kind of the late hippie, Christian kind of hippie kind of group.
Sure.
So it was very communal and brother this and brother that. And, you know, it was just a great fit for us at the time. And I don't look at it as something as I grew out of so much as I was exposed to a wider world. And that's what I tell my students is so important about college, is that until you get to in a college classroom and start opening your eyes to all these different perspectives and viewpoints, you're not an educated person. And I had to do that on my own without a college classroom, and I did it through reading. And but when I finally got in the door of a college classroom, I thought, this is something new.
Yeah.
This is something different, and I was so thrilled. Christianity Today reviewed my book and said that I was a master at reinvention. And that was not a compliment. That was like
Roger Ebert gives her the thumbs up, but that particular publication did not.
They were not pleased with me. But I think we all reinvent ourselves, and that's what I'm so excited about at community college, is that here are people who are getting a new vision of what they can be and where they can go, and that's why it's such a privilege to be in a classroom. I'm really happy about it.
I would agree. It's funny because the older I am, the older I get, the more I want to learn.
Right.
I've got this thirst to get on Wikipedia and look stuff up.
So great.
But as a kid, you know, you're like, I don't want.
You knew it all when you were a kid.
Why do I need to know about the Battle of Gettysburg? When am I ever going to use that?
Right.
You know, and I understand that. I can wholeheartedly appreciate that. But the older you get, at least in my world, is that I find myself going. And we live in such a wonderful age now where you can look stuff up and research things.
Sure.
I just go, you know, I'm going to Google that and find out, you know, like I Googled you.
Right.
I'm like, tell me about Carolyn Briggs, all the awards she's won, you know, and it brings up the interviews that you've done. Mm-hmm. We live in such a fantastic world of knowledge that, you know, the internet's not too terribly old, but, you know, 22, 23, 24 years old. But there's so much out there.
So much.
And the research, do you use those tools? I mean, like
absolutely.
when you first started writing, I'm guessing you had to go to the library.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean,
I'm not saying don't go to the library, but what I'm saying is you can now just, you know, get those tools at your fingertips.
I mean, it can be information overload that we just get stymied and stuck because there's so much, but it's also, and you have to be really careful about your sources, you know,
Yes.
where am I getting stuff? But it's all out there for the taking now. There's no excuses to be ignorant.
Yeah.
I mean, on the first day of class, a lot of times I'll look at the big blackboard and draw a little triangle on the edge of it, and I'll color that triangle in. I'll say to my students, this is what you know. But I said, this is how much you don't know. And then I just draw the line down the board, and it'll go out the hall and down the Highway 14, right? There's so much.
Well, you know, it's true, and you touched on this a little bit, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form trying to corner or pigeonhole the students here, but it's amazing how many of them don't know the literary works of Steinbeck. And,
Right.
I mean, I'm just throwing that name out there, but just all of the fantastic authors, Thoreau, and
Sure.
they don't read them.
No.
They don't. Maybe they've seen the movie, maybe they read the Cliff's Notes like I
Right.
did to try to get through junior high. You know, they're not reading Moby Dick.
No. No.
You know, they're waiting for the movie. Gregory Peck, by the way, great film. But it's too bad, because I think unless you are taking a class like yours, or you are taking English Lit, or you're taking British authors, or I took that in college, you're not necessarily exposed to those because parents aren't passing that down.
Right. What happened?
I think we live in, here I'm on my soapbox now, but I feel like we're living in a society where kids are so preoccupied with so many other things. They don't necessarily want to sit down and read Black Beauty or, you know, Catcher in the Rye.
No.
Or
They want to read a Facebook post.
they do want to read a
Right?
Facebook
They want to read
post.
Twitter.
Well, okay, so you're working on some stuff.
Yep.
Yeah. Now, the book, the novel, I'm sorry,
Yes.
I want to use your words. The novel that you're working on, can you give us a little, cat out of the bag a little bit?
Well, the novel I'm working on might have a community college in the background.
It might. It might have a bald television host.
He might make an appearance in a chapter. You
He
don't
might
know.
show up. You never know.
It's funny because all authors draw from their lives. We're told from the very beginning of our writing careers that write what you know.
Right.
So that is that verisimilitude that a reader will say, hey, this seems real. This is something that isn't manufactured. It's not synthetic. And then we identify with it. And, I mean, C.S. Lewis said, we read to know we're not alone. So I think that whenever you can tap into those universal things, what's it like to be on the job and the first day of a job and everything's over your head, you know, all that stuff. What's it like to face a group of students who are just daring you to do anything to engage them?
Yeah.
You know, what's that like?
So that's why. So it's going to be a community college setting, maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We changed the names to protect the innocent.
Yeah, we definitely
There's
do that.
there's no doubt. But I do agree with you that you do write based on what you know. And then are you ever a little hurt when people
They're not interested?
They're like, well, no, it's not so much that, but they say to you, you know nothing about this subject.
Right.
And you're like, but this is what I do.
Right.
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 Sure you do.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's critics out there, and they are, especially, you know, in the age of the internet, people making their comments. It's made literature a little dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
People are very ready.
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. We are almost out of time. We've got just a little bit of time left. I want to encourage folks to take her class. When do you teach this course?
Well, every fall.
Every fall.
We've just begun a new semester, and my students, I'll give a plug to them. They're great. There's only 9, but they are 9 of the brightest kids I've met at MCC. So I'm thrilled to be working with these guys. And we're going to do our own literary magazine. We're going to self-publish. We're going to publish all of our work this semester. So we're working on names right now. Right now, the latest name is Oyster Train, I believe. Somebody came up with. So.
Hopefully that does not have some kind of hidden meaning.
Oyster Train.
I don't. Kids. All right, that's going to wrap. Carolyn, thank you.
Of course.
That's going to wrap it up for Discover Marshalltown. I'm Kyle Martin. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time.